Hello and welcome. Today I'm just going to cut straight to the chase and get right to the topic that I'm going to be arguing with myself about. Today's topic is corporal punishment. The way that this is going to work is first I'm going to lay down some definitions so that way we all know what it is exactly that I'm talking about. And then once I've gotten definitions out of the way, I'm going to go straight into arguing. So when I'm talking about corporal punishment, I'm talking about corporal punishment in schools. So this is physical punishment such as caning or spanking in regards to breaking the rules. This does not include when a student needs to be restrained by an adult in order to provide safety to other students or teachers. So if a student is physically restrained in order to break up a fight, that is not corporal punishment. Also, when I'm talking about the physical punishment, it is physical punishment that is being dealt by an adult to a student, not a student to student. This is strictly someone who is in authority punishing a student. Alright, time to get into the arguing. So I'm going to have these two heads representing the two sides. If you are listening to this in podcast form, apologize because you won't be able to see the visuals, but hopefully it should be clear enough just from listening to it. So the A head is going to represent the pro, or being for corporal punishment, and the Z head is going to represent the negative or opposition to corporal punishment in schools.
Please listen carefully.
Okay, so to start off, I am not even going to bother trying to defend having corporal punishment below the 9th grade. And reason for that is there's a lot of research out there showing that it isn't healthy for younger children, especially in a school environment. So what I'm going to suggest is allowing corporal punishment to be used as an option or an alternative to other sorts of punishments like suspension or, I don't know, it's been a while since I've been in school, but it allowed to be used for high schoolers as long as the school is able to obtain the permission for or from both the student themselves as well as their parent or guardian. That way it should be able to avoid any of the issues with the school misusing the corporal punishment and parents being surprised by their students coming home or their children coming home with bruises or marks from the punishment. Okay, I mean that does sound fine, but there are a couple of issues that I can think of to bring up against that. First one is, how can we say that there still won't be any negative side effects to it? I mean, if you start allowing actual physical pain to be introduced, wouldn't that make it less likely for students to want to attend school? I mean, if they start associating actual pain with school, that could make it, or make them less willing to show up, or have a harder time for them being in the classroom. Also, how do we know that the school will not pressure the students into going along with the physical punishment. I mean, sure, the high school students are a bit older, and they're almost at the point where legally they are treated as adults, but there's still that discrepancy or the difference in power. And so how do we know that it isn't going to be abused, and that you will not have teachers, adults, using it as an opportunity to inflict pain on minors? Also, wouldn't that be allowing actual representatives of the state or actual workers of whatever state this is in to be inflicting physical punishment on minors? That, I don't know, that just seems a bit worrisome to me. And so those are good things to bring up, but the biggest point that is missing there is that it can be an alternative to other forms of punishment. With regards to, like, suspension from school. We want the students to be at school learning things, and if we are removing them from school, then isn't that counterproductive? There's also really no reason, or there's no way that we would be able to fully remove any possibility that the students are not being pressured just because we're human. But having to get the permission of the guardian or parent, as well as the student themselves, that at least removes the school from being the main influence behind it. This then changes it into being a matter of the student. Like, is this something that the student should be able to choose? And I think that should be able to answer those concerns. I do understand the argument about there being an alternative, but two things come to mind. First off, what's the risk that the school would still apply the pressure by increasing the other forms of punishment? Say that usually you'd only get suspended for 1 day, now that same thing gets you suspended for 2 days, or you can take the physical punishment. How do we know that may not happen from schools where the administrators feel that physical punishment is better than the other alternatives? So they try to steer or pressure the students into choosing that. Also, how do we prevent there being cases of actual long-term physical trauma caused by this? I mean, we think of it as being just paddling or spanking, but there is evidence of there being really severe trauma created by this. For example, back in 2005, the AP News reported that there was an 18-year-old girl who sued her school district, and because she had bruises on her buttocks and her hand was so injured when she tried to deflect one of the shots that she ended up having to go to the emergency room, where her hand was then placed in a cast. I mean, it just seems like, yeah, it's a good idea, but there are way too many things that couldn't be controlled by it, and we risk having people severely harmed by this. I mean, it's not just an alternative, this is something that can cause actual physical trauma or physical injuries. And I understand those concerns, but this is an alternative, and it's one that needs both the permission and decision by the student as well as their parents, because we're trying to remove as much of the possibility of the school trying to pressure kids into this. Also, it's not like other forms of school punishment are absent of any bad side effects. For example, school suspensions have been shown to decrease the scores of both the students who were suspended as well as their classmates who weren't. And so it's not like we're taking a bad choice here and allowing physical punishment when there are a bunch of other good choices. And it's also not like I'm saying that we should not be trying to have positive reinforcement with this, trying to engage the students as much as possible. Because, I know that there are other methods to try and cut down on negative behavior from students. But there are going to be times when a punishment is needed, and I think that it just makes sense for there to be as many options as possible. That's still not good enough. Sure, other forms of punishment are going to be negative and have their side effects, but that doesn't mean that it would be acceptable to allow corporal punishment. It opens up too many possibilities for causing actual physical harm to a student. Also, how do we know that there won't be any instances of sexual abuse? Sure, I know that you're going to say that there's no possibility of removing any possibility of that from happening, but how do we prevent something like that from happening? You prevent something like that from happening by instating some sort of rule where only female instructors or administrators can paddle or physically punish female students. Only male instructors can physically paddle or punish the male students. That way you can try and cut down on some of the instances or the possibilities of there being any sort of sexual abuse. And again, yeah, it's not going to get rid of everything, but we're trying to minimize the possibility of it happening. But that sort of rule isn't going to work, is it? There was a case back in 2012 at the Springtown Independent School District in Texas, where two Texas mothers complained that a male assistant principal had severely paddled their daughters, to quote from the Time magazine article. And they pointed out that the school district had a policy where only members or officials of the same sex as the students could do the paddling. And when this complaint was brought up to the school district or the school board decided to drop that rule. So, how are we going to ensure that that kind of a rule is held? If it's going to be by some sort of school district to school district deal, I don't think that we're going to end up with a level playing field between the school districts, because some school districts are going to see things very different from other school districts. And I do agree with that. I think that it would take some sort of federal law to apply an even playing field across all of the states and territories of the United States. Right now, we currently have 28 states as well as the District of Columbia that prohibit corporal punishment, some states that do not prohibit it, and then 15 states that expressly do permit it. So we would need some sort of legislation or Supreme Court ruling to be able to apply that level playing field. And I'm not saying that there are no issues with the idea of allowing physical punishment to be an option for high schoolers, because there are problems, but there are problems with the other kinds of punishment that we allow. And so I think that by having students be able to choose it as an option and being required to get the permission of the parents, we can do our best to mitigate those negative harms. And so I think that's why we should allow it as an option. And I'm saying that we should not allow physical punishment to be an option because it's introducing new harms to the students. I understand other options are not perfect, but there are too many unknowns, too many things that could cause severe physical trauma. We're not just talking about a little bit of swelling or uncomfortableness, but actual blistering or cuts, severe bruises. These aren't things that we want students to have to experience at school, and especially not associate with school. And so I think that we shouldn't allow it because there are just too many unknowns with it. All right. And so with that, I declare that I'm done arguing with myself. So if you have any other questions or you want to do a little bit more research about this yourself, I've provided the links of all the articles and information that I've got in the description below. Now, if you want to continue hearing arguments that I have with myself, or other things to do with public speaking, then I would urge you to subscribe. And if you have any other topics, options that you'd like me to talk about, then feel free to comment below. If you have any opinions on this, feel free to comment below. And I will see you guys next time. And in the meantime, I hope that you have a good time.
Please listen carefully.